You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation's Lead On Lessons from Military Leaders. I'm David Deary, your host and the president of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. Joining me today is one of our, started out as a volunteer for one of our classes called Foundry, the second Foundry class. She went on to become one of the leads for that class. She did volunteers in the Chief Petty Officer Legacy Academy and Pride Day. Somebody who's been with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation far longer as a volunteer than she joined us as a board member. So I want to welcome Serrita Nicholson. Serrita is a Navy command master chief now, right, Serrita?
No, I'm not a command master chief. I'm a logistics specialist master chief serving in Norfolk, Virginia at the Reserve Component Command.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. You perform as a command master chief, and that's probably why
Mhm.
I referred to you as such. So, Serrita, you've been in the Navy how many years now?
27 years.
27 years. So,
And
uh,
and Dave, I have a birthday coming up next week. I'm going to be 45 years old and I'm feeling it. I did
you're
Selectee PT this morning
okay.
and I'm feeling it.
So okay, select EPT. As the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, we provide leadership development for all enlisted military across all branches. In fact, our last Foundry class, we had our first Space Force student and mentor. So not everybody may be familiar with Select DPT. Why don't you explain what Select DPT is?
Of course. So with the Navy, we have a tradition where we have um, I would say initiation process when sailors are selected from E6 going to E7. And we refer to that as Chief Petty Officer Initiation Season. And what we do is we do a lot of team building, we do a lot of mentorship, and we also do a lot of PT, usually 3 or more times a week. And it involves group runs and sprint runs and a lot of calisthenics and a lot of different exercises, as well as close order drill where we practice our marching and our cadence, where we sing like a song to coincide with our steps.
Mhm.
It's really fun and exciting. But like I said earlier, I'm a logistics specialist. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because we are almost in the last week of the fiscal year, which means in addition to selectee PTing and training and mentoring, we also have a large budget to close out for the
Sure.
fiscal year, which is kind of exciting. This is when we show how well we are with our skills and budgeting and managing funds and also executing things too. So,
That's a really great definition. And as someone who made Chief Petty Officer myself back in 1996, uh, one of the things that they stressed during my initiation season was piling on as much as they can onto our plate, uh, more to prove to ourselves how much we can actually take on, as well as to just convey to us as a future chief petty officer that there's an expectation that you're able to accomplish more than the daily norm, if you will. So having to go out there, making the time to do the select DPT, as well as closing out the books and doing everything else and managing the people, I should say, leading the people and managing the resources that you have to make sure that everything closes out correctly. So during the initiation season, along with giving them as much as they can do, we task them with a lot of tasks, assign a lot of tasks for them. And it's more about teamwork than leadership. But there are things, we have this thing called a charge book where people give charges, they give leadership advice and things like that we can refer back to. I still look at my charge book from time to time, even as a retiree.
me
So
too.
well, you're not a retiree yet, but I know what you mean. But let me ask you this: when it comes to leadership advice, everybody has advice, and it always seems up the higher we go up the promotion food chain, the more advice we want to give. So, is there ever been like the worst piece of leadership advice someone ever gave you?
Yes. Um, and I would share. Um, so so the one thing that comes to mind is when I was pregnant with my son Xavier, who is now 16 years old. And so As a sailor, we're always taught to manage our career and also our work-life balance. And
Hmm.
so when I was on shore duty, I became pregnant, my first pregnancy with my son, Xavier, and my chief highly suggested that I get an abortion. And his logic behind that was, hey, you're such a stellar first class, and I'm afraid that if you have a child, your performance is going to decrease. And so, really horrible advice, right? Coming from a senior leader in the military. But yeah, I received that advice from one of my leadership chiefs when I was a first class petty officer. And I had to say, wait a second, chief, isn't your wife pregnant? And he said, yes. And I said, well, did you ask her to get an abortion? And of course, he looked at me like, well, why would you expect me to do that? And so I had to turn the tables to say, why would you even suggest this to me? And you don't even practice this in your own family. And so I would tell you my pregnancy was not planned. However, I was 28 years old when I did finally become pregnant. I was well established. I was, a career. I was also married, and had served in the Navy for about, I don't know, 14 years up until that point. And so that was the worst piece of advice that I have ever received
Wow,
from Navy leadership while in the Navy.
that's something else. You
Mhm.
you made a comment in that story that we have heard over the years, and I'd like to just unpack it a little bit. Do as I say, not as I do. And do you find in your 27 years in the service that leaders and throughout the chain of command, enlisted an officer, is that a leadership attitude that's common sometimes or uncommon in your experience?
So in my early career, it was
Okay.
common. I joined the Navy in 1994, right before you made
Yeah.
Chief Petty
Hmm.
Officer. And in the 90s, there were things like a keg of beer or
Hmm.
beer at the end of the PT cycle, because it was rewarded that you finish, you can drink. Not so much today. Also, things like coming to work late, having a laissez-faire attitude. I honestly thought that when I made chief in 2011, it was going to be great because then I thought that I could just go into chief's mess. Not the case anymore. And so now I'd like to say the
Hmm.
Navy has transformed a lot to where we have created psychologically safe working environments for sailors, or at least we try to, so that they can actually communicate openly and effectively. They also understand why they're doing tasks, which is, not just doing and saying what I do and things like that, but having the
Hmm.
communication with the sailors to let them know why they're doing a task and why it's important. So a lot more communication standardizes with the Navy today than it was back
Hmm.
when I was a junior sailor. When it was do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, you use the phrase the Navy's transformed. I don't know if the Navy transformed. It could be a play on words. I think the people transformed, and the people make up the Navy. But I do think that the generations, whether we want to say it's access through technology, like this medium, for example, more information available. There's more tools out there that people can use to learn how to lead, as well as I think there's a certain argument to be made as the military as a whole reduced its force and strength. Right? We started doing more with less people, or I should say, it's not really doing more. We just accomplished the mission with less people. In some cases, we did do more still, but even when you said after you made chief 2011, you probably experienced this before then. The amount of praise and recognition, communication, you use the word, that we give. I mean, listen, when you came in and certainly before you came in, if the chief showed up in your spot, in your
There
space,
was
there
a
was a
problem.
problem,
That's right.
right? There was a problem. You did not want the chief in your
Hmm.
up in your
Hmm.
Wheaties at all. It's like, oh man, chief's here. What I do wrong? Where'd we screw up? In fact, it was my goal as a radio man to keep the chief out of radio. I got it. And where and if they weren't telling you you're doing a good job, I mean, they tell you do bad. So if they're not telling you you're doing a bad job, you assume
Right.
you're doing a good job, right? Where I think a lot of that has gone by the wayside for better or worse. I think from a praise and recognition standpoint, it's better. I do think where I have seen or I saw is I felt that as an E5, E6, I had more responsibility to accomplish my tasks without direct supervision. I think there tends to be more direct supervision of some of those tasks that I used to do as an E5 now have to be accomplished as a E7. Do you experience any of that yourself, or am I just kind of
I
living in the
had a
past?
conversation with my sailors this morning. So I still conduct quarters every morning. I'm old school like that. And so every morning I do that. And I had a conversation today with them about micromanaging. And what I explained was, micromanaging, I don't like doing it because I feel like when you do micromanage people, you kind of take away that innovation that they have. We give them the tools of what they have to do. We tell them, get so and so task accomplished, and of course, we want to make sure it's legal, ethical, and safe, and it's done in accordance with the guidelines. Now, how you get the task completed, I should not have to tell you step A through Z on how to do it. You have the instructions and the guidance. I want you to go forth and prosper. And so that's one thing that
Hmm.
the Navy does has done as a whole a lot, which is empowering the sailors and not necessarily micromanaging the
Hmm.
sailors when you're talking about the differences between old school Navy and new school Navy.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it does my heart good to hear that you do quarters. I can remember doing quarters when I was on the USS New Jersey, and we were in Homeport in Long Beach, and there's about 40 of us, 30 or 40 in the division. Man, it's cold out there. You're sitting out there on the flight deck, or we didn't have a flight deck. We are on the teakwood deck by turret two. And this one Yahoo come. We're all wearing a jacket, and then this one sailor comes out without a jacket. Chief like, get your jackets off. Everybody have to then be without a
You have
jacket.
to be
That whole
uniformed.
uniform thing,
Hmm.
right? So wow,
So
that's one thing I remember.
I
So
can tell you
go ahead.
sometimes quarters have changed. There's sometimes where I have to hold virtual quarters because we're in a COVID environment.
Okay.
And so
Hmm.
yeah, it's we have to get creative as far as how we're leading through COVID, through this COVID environment. So I get it.
Sure. Yeah. So, how's the Navy strengthened you and help and deal with situations, good and bad? I mean, you shared with us the bad decision situation you had to deal with, and then continue to press on. But is there any other examples where the Navy's maybe have strengthened you over the years?
Of course. So you mentioned in the beginning, you talked about the Enlisted
Mhm.
Leadership Foundation and how I became a
Mhm.
mentor for the Foundry. Well, I first became a mentor in 2012 when one of my sailors, his name is Donald Bailey, and I still talk to him to this day. Now he's a senior chief. Donald Bailey was one of my first classes, and he went through Foundry Class 001. And he
Mhm.
was one of my sailors that I'd always talk to him and provide him with guidance, but he never listened. It was always, hey, we've been having these talks and things like that, and I don't understand what I'm not communicating. But come on now, this is what we have to do, and we would come up with teams and plans and things like that. But after 5 days of being on board the USS Midway, Donald Bailey, then a first class, gave me a coin, a challenge coin from the Foundry. And he says, thank you for everything that you've done for me. All of a sudden, after 5 days, I get it. And it blew me away because I had to say, after 5 days, and I've been talking to you for about 6 months, I need to be part of this organization that's making changes so quickly in its sailors, growing in its sailors. And so that's when I first became a mentor. But I've
Mhm.
always come back because I felt like just like the Chiefs initiation season, the
Mhm.
Foundry has provided me with an opportunity to I don't know, continue to grow and develop and also I hear different ideas, be around different
Mhm.
people and kind of grow as a whole. And so I am always pushing the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, not just because I'm the board member or one of the board members, it's because I wholeheartedly believe in the organization and what it has to offer as far as leading and providing guidance and that community. It's really great.
Well, you certainly have helped make that difference by being part of it. And you mentioned the USS Midway. We couldn't do it without the Midway support when we are face to face with our programs, and they provide us their ship so that we can house all of our students on board the ship overnight. As a nonprofit, we want to make sure these classes are affordable because we know over 85% of our students pay their own way. And boy, if we had to put them up in hotel rooms, the cost would go astronomical. So the fact that the Midway provides us those beds, if you will, plus just how many people over the last, gosh, 16 classes. Now, granted, the last four have been virtual, but prior to, how many never even set foot on a ship, or spent the night, because we have some of those jobs in the Navy that they
Hmm.
never they never have. And what started as a Navy focused class program, now we've had every branch of the military come through. It's so exciting. Um,
That is exciting.
and so thank you again. We what about? I want to explore one more thing real quick because we're coming close to the end of time. We may have to have a part two. You talk
Oh,
and you refer to multiple times about the Chiefs' mess. Um, how has the Chiefs' mess impacted you? Aside from that, I'll keep referring back to that one chief. But how has the Chiefs' mess impacted you in your life?
well, it's been so I would tell you, I'm trying to be transparent, but it's been up and down. And
Okay.
I say that because, I'm going from a start of the Navy, E1, all the way up until today, E9. And, in the Chiefs mess, we always preach brotherhood and sisterhood. And that's great as long as you have people that are willing to accept and embrace and things like that. And so, in today's cheese mess, I feel like, it's a cohesive environment,
Mhm.
but I also have to let you know that uh, uh, there's still bad apples.
Sure.
And I say that because, we see the Navy Times, we see all the reports, we still see things, but it's also our responsibility to make sure that we continue to mentor people through whatever situation they're going through and try to be the best for them. But also, we can't enable people if they're making bad
Mhm.
decisions. And so that's what I do love about the Chiefs mess. It is a strong chain, and we do have a great working environment. And when there are things that need to be corrected, things are brought up to light or brought out into the light.
And every organization, every fraternal organization, business line of business, there's always going to be a quote unquote bad apple. Um, and listen, if there were never any bad apples, there'd be no need for leadership programs. um, but
Amen.
but part of sometimes bad apples don't realize they're bad apples. They're just mirroring people that they learned under. And if they've seen people who may not, and then bad apple can listen. I've had a bad apple just because on one part of it is a little bruised. I've also had bad apples that the whole thing is bruised and has a worm in it. So bad apple can cover a whole range. So there could be a leader that somebody is following, and they see that leader continue to promote and excel, even though they're more maybe they're just a positional leader. They're the kind of leader that has to remind everybody, listen, I'm in charge. Okay. And if you have to remind people that you're in charge, you're not much of a leader. So but you know
Yes.
what? Over time, I think a lot of bad apples identified. Sometimes they self-select, sometimes we help identify them. Sometimes they can look around and see others promote around them, and then their promotions have stopped. And hopefully they'll do an internal gut check. They'll look around, they'll ask for some assistance. But clearly you went from E1 through E9. So I've known you for going on 10 years, and you're not a bad apple. And I've actually seen how you've changed some of your leadership along the way as well. So listen, one final question
Yes.
before we go. So listen, as leaders in the higher up the food chain we go, we're expected to make decisions. and not every decision is the right decision. But sometimes we get lucky. So, have you ever made a bad decision, maybe not realizing it's a bad decision, and maybe you didn't realize it till after the completion, but one of those bad decisions that ultimately had a good outcome, though?
Yes. So I was reflecting on my career, and the one thing that you talked about earlier, in fact, you introduced me as a command master chief. And so I want to tell you, I was selected as a command senior chief. Um, and what the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because a lot of people to this day saying, "Why aren't you a CMC?" And there's a whole story behind that. And so when I was in San Diego, California, I got selected to be the command senior chief or a command senior chief. And I actually had the opportunity to hold the position as the command master chief for several months because we didn't have a master chief on board the ship. Anyway, it was promotion time, and I had to make a hard decision. Should I archive my command senior chief and revert back to my source rate, or should I continue to be a command senior chief and possibly not promote? And so I had to, look at the pros and cons, but I decided to archive my command senior chief appointment and revert back to my supply appointment I also because I held the position for a few months, I actually never served in a tour as a command senior chief, and so I felt
Mm-hmm.
like that would hurt me, and it became a great decision because when everything was said and done, I did promote to master chief, just not command master chief, and so sometimes you have to follow your gut on things and look at the pros and cons of things. And one thing that I always say is there's always a reason why things are happening. It's always a reason. Even if I'm stuck in traffic for hours, I try to say, okay, there's a reason why I'm at this place at this time in this moment. There's a reason for everything. And so I would say continue focusing on the good outcomes, and lead with integrity.
Yeah, that's a great story. So, some could say that was a bad decision, um, but it had the good outcomes at the end. And ultimately, that's a decision that affects you and your family. And boy, that's a heavy load.
That's
Well,
right.
Sharita, I want to thank you for taking the time this morning. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you do on behalf of all enlisted military through the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. I'm David Deary once again with Lead On Lessons with Military Leaders. You just listened to Sharita Nicholson, a Master Chief Petty Officer serving on the East Coast. Join us every 1st and 15th military paydays for another episode. You can visit our website at www.enlistedleadershipfoundation.org to learn more about the Enlisted Leadership Foundation, our programs. And soon, when we actually do this for real, we're going to have a special offer for you to go to check out just because you tuned in here. So until next time, thank you and lead on.